What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? We are here with another episode. It is Steiner, and this is Secondhand Talent. Thank you, of course, to Luke Chu for the desk candy. Thank you to Mark Spusta for the art. And thank you to this week's guest, Record Master, award winner, just all-around extraordinaire, Maor Appelbaum of Maor Appelbaum Mastering. Maor, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
You know, it's a unique pleasure to have folks on the show twice because it's not a question I get, it's now over 100 times, but I still don't get to ask it that often in a professional setting. But you've been a guest on Secondhand Talent. You were part of season 3. Now kind of knowing a little bit more about what it is, when I asked you to be back on the show, I'm kind of curious as to what your interpretation of Secondhand Talent is today and if that's changed at all from our first discussion.
I always like to come with an open mind of what a podcast is. The questions asked really determined what the subject and how we go deep into the details. And some podcasts are for specific trades and some are more generic and, they're more giving you an overlook of what the process of that type of profession. And some are just, going in deep to the specs of stuff. Coming back to this one again is just fun for me. It was fun last time. I hope it's fun this time. I believe it will be.
Well, it's really I wasn't quite sure where you were going with that, and I'm really glad with where that landed. It's nice to hear because that's exactly what we're going for, is something that's not really so hyper specific to genre, even to music, and not something that's so hyper specific to anyone's particular taste, but rather to just share stories of folks who are in the business of helping others enjoy their lives through music and through other forms of art. And it's really great to hear from someone who's been on the show that this kind of does strike that happy medium and trying to find that place to appeals to the wider base who may not really even give a second thought to what record mastering really even is. Like kind of what you were saying, a more substantive interview of rather than an interview specifically about a piece of music or a specific project that they're working on. And I do find that a lot of interviews are geared towards that. And, a lot of interviews that you do specifically are really technical, which is not a bad thing, but it's great to be able to bring you out to a wider audience. Folks may recognize the hat that I'm wearing here, the Heady Wax Fiends hat, the greatest group on Facebook, and I recommend to all the fiends to check out this one because vinyl's going to be a big part of the conversation. But more, it's interesting having someone back because even though we're a little while into the show, it's still new. And so what I did was I went back and I went and tried to look for things that we hadn't really discussed in our previous interview because I wanted to make it a little bit new and exciting. And I highly recommend folks go check out the first interview because it'll be completely different to this one in quality as well. We switched platforms, but I have notes, folks. Notes for the first time in season 6 at the time of this taping. One of the things that we never really got into, we did explore a little bit your taste in music and kind of, your beginning there. But what we didn't get into as much is when you got interested and how you got interested in the technical aspect of it.
That's a good question because, I was always in music as a kid. I loved listening to cassette, CDs, vinyl, whatever it was, video, whatever. And I had bands of my own that I played in and performed at shows and did some recordings. And I worked doing engineering as well and different positions, from live sound to broadcasting to rehearsals to recording to I was a DJ, I was a music journalist, did a bunch of stuff surrounding all that. And I think mastering kind of came naturally to me because being a DJ at clubs or on radio shows, and being a music journalist kind of gave me the perspective of the outside, how it's presented, how it's received. And then not just as a listener, but someone who reviews it or plays it to people, in the club or on the show. Sorry, my chair is squeaky.
Oh, that's fine. Secondhand talent.
Eh,
We'll roll with it.
um, so yeah, that was always there. And then I think that mastering just came as the buffer between them. It's the last part of the creative, artistic, and technical aspect. It's the first technical aspect of the release, creating the CD, the files for the CD and the other stuff. But it's basically that buffer zone between the production and the consumer.
I think, to pick up on something that you said there, which I find really fascinating, is that background as a critic. Because having that outside perspective, the overhead view, as I like to call it, of kind of how will this be received critically amongst the audience, amongst the listening population, being able to tap into that zeitgeist and bring that into your prior knowledge of production, etc., really is what does make mastering the perfect thing. And it's that specifically because, like you mentioned, and I'll have you elaborate on this in just a moment, record mastering, there's no penultimate. It is the step between, what the song is and then what the consumer hears. So there's no room, really, even, I mean, I don't want to say there's no room for error, things happen, yeah, yada, yada, but there's really no room for error in that position because you are, that last step. And again, that understanding of critical reception, public reception, radio play, etc., as someone who writes that up, I think is integral and I think shines a really important light onto the path that you wound up taking. Was there a particular, you mentioned playing in bands and you mentioned doing production and all of these things, but was there a particular inflection point in your career where you realized that, oh, mastering is definitely it? Was it a project you worked on or something of that sort? Or what was the moment when you realized this is actually what I want to continue forth doing?
I think it was just kind of a timely thing where is I wanted to do that, and in time I wanted to do more and more. It wasn't just like one spark. Even in the beginning where I didn't know what mastering was, um, I did play with the EQ on the tape recorder or system. So I was doing kind of that, right? Um, and then as there was accessibility to the tools, then yeah, it just was like, oh, okay, let's do that. And I think that just in time, I found that that was my forte. That's where I could really bring a lot of value into what is given to me. Where other jobs in the audio, I can bring a certain amount of value, but I think the gravitation to this was like a calling, if you want to call it.
Was there a particular initial project that you completed that you felt was like the one?
No, it was a combination of stuff that I did that, I dabbled with it and I liked it. And then, I tried something else and I liked it. And I kind of felt that I hear it differently than if I hear, let's say, a production or a mix where I can bring ideas for sure because, I do have a sense of balance. And I mean, in mastering, you do need to have a sense of balance because you're balancing frequencies too. But sometimes. But you're dealing with how the song is tilted upwards, downwards, whatever. So I do know how to find the balances between levels, but I think that it's more about dealing with a limited amount of stuff and doing what's possible with it, meaning it's a two-track stereo file of the mix or the loud mix or whatever type of mix it is, and then wherever I can take it to.
So, just to elaborate with an example on for our readers, listeners, and viewers, if I brought over here, I've got the cassette tape from my uncle's band, the Lonely Moans, who are our theme song. This was their cassette submission tape to Sub Pop, I believe, in 1988. At least that's what it says on the back. So, based on what the mix that went into this is, that's what you're capable of then producing and turning around.
Well, I work with what I get, meaning there's limitation to what I can do with what comes in. I have the ability to adjust the volume, dynamics, and tonal structure of it. Also, width and all that. Um, EQing is part of the
Well, what
tonal
are some
structure
of
as well.
the dynamics that are outside of your control?
Well, decision making that I'm not involved with. So, for example, if I make a decision and they don't like it and they want something else, then I can do it based on what they give me. But if that's their choice, I'm just operating as the operator, which still I'm doing my job, but I'm still doing my job as a mastering engineer. But some decisions are not in my control. Other things that are not in my control is the quality of the recording or the quality of the mix or both. And also another thing that's out of my control is the quality of the release in terms of what comes after me. So if it's vinyl, I don't have any control on the cutting, the plating, or the pressing. If it's a cassette, I don't have a control on how they recorded it to the cassette. If it's the CD, I don't have control on the CD manufacturing.
Let's talk about vinyl for a little bit. Actually, referring to the hat that I'm wearing, the Heady Wax Fiends. I do have a couple of questions from some friends of mine in the group. Now, the original Led Zeppelin albums are known for the way that they were pressed, and that every record was said to even tremble from the bass. Some consider those to be the perfect recordings of Zeppelin albums. Do you agree or disagree? Because some have suggested that let it shake, rattle, and roll, that's the template for the way vinyl should be. Or do you feel like it should be different?
Eh, Vinyl is a physical medium. It's what you call a groove media. Okay. And there's limitations to that format in terms of how much spread is the stereo and how much low end information can move from side to side without affecting the actual groove cut, the cut. So there's a lot of limitations in vinyl, and to overcome them, you have to be very, very technically capable of doing those things with the gear that you have in hand, and not every cutter will have the same gear. So it's not the same lathe. It's not the same cutting computer. It's not the same cutting amplifiers and processors. So I think that um, there's no one way to cut a record. Probably the only way is to do your best job with what you have. But you can have a record cut by a few different cutting engineers, even if you supply them the same material, and it will sound different. The cut will be different based on their equipment, and their knowledge and the ability to work with what they have.
And on the strength of the mix and the master as well.
Yes, but that's something that, like I said, if you give them the same one,
Fair, yes.
they will give you different results based on their equipment and knowledge and the ability to transfer that
Speaking of
into the lab.
which speaking of which leads me wonderfully to my next question, from my friend Matt Heller. Um, he used the example of Frank Zappa's 200 Motels and how the original mix did not sound good, but the reissue was absolutely magnificent. And I'd love to hear a little bit about how, saying we have the original master, what does it take to bring that brightness and that width out of the mix that the original master did not have?
So it's a good question. It's actually very complicated to answer that because a lot of times people call the original, but sometimes the original is not the original. It's a copy of something. And also the opposite, the remaster could be a copy. Sometimes the remaster sounds way different, and the complaint is it's less good. And in some cases, it's not the actual original copy of the.
We're not going to get to my third question yet, but yeah, go ahead.
So, it's a chicken and the egg here. There is also a matter of what equipment was used back in the day to create that record, either in vinyl or in CD. And certain things were transferred to digital as is, and they were more fitting in the vinyl way. They were the way they were EQ'd. And then when they were transferred, they sounded a bit different. And then later on, years afterwards, they took the original tapes and then they re-EQ'd them to fit the CD format, or re-EQ'd them also for vinyl on other equipment. But sometimes they could add high end or low end or rebalance it. And it's not uncommon that certain records were done in a certain era with the limitations, and then 10, 20, 30 years after they were redone, either remixed again, so there's new balances, or just remastered, or remixed and remastered, of course. That, if you remix, you're going to remaster it again. Um, and the equipment or the ability to work with new things opened uh, the possibility of improving it. And I've done that, for example, with the band Faith No More. They had a record called We Care a Lot, and it was assigned to an indie label back then. And almost 10 years ago, I think it probably nine a bit, years ago, I had the chance to remaster it from the original tapes. And we got more low end, we got more punch, we got more level, of course, uh, basically using the original tapes, but now we have better equipment to work with it and time too.
Well, in that case where, you have an original that's a classic, what's become a classic album, that then got the remaster treatment. One of my favorite bands, and will be the final question in this segment. One of my favorite bands, God Street Wine, their 1992 album Bag. The only version really publicly available is the 2012 remaster. And my question is there a case where it would make sense for a band to just not put out the original release and only put up a marked remaster?
So I'll go back to the Faith No More example. So now if you go online, you'll find most cases you'll find the remastered version. It's called Faith No More We Care a Lot, the Deluxe Band Edition. And the reason you'll find in a lot of cases a remastered version is because there's new contracts that happens. with different record labels, and sometimes a major label will, or a subsidiary of that major label will buy the rights for a new version of it, or they'll buy the rights for the original, but now they want to repress it, or reissue it, and to make it more worth for people to maybe buy it, they'll add bonus tracks. Just like we did with the Faith No More. There's the original album remastered, and then there's a lot of bonus tracks and rare versions of the songs, from demos to different remixes to live. So nowadays, it's not uncommon that you won't see the original version and you'll see a remaster, especially in streaming services. When it comes to CDs, you can still find um, reprints, because some companies will just reprint the original.
I actually, when I saw God Street Wine a couple of months ago at the time of this taping, was hoping to grab a copy, and the only one available was in the box set, and it was the remaster. So even on a CD, that's what I've got. And that'll end the Fiend's Fault question section. Thank you very much for the submissions, folks. We really appreciate it. Moving on to the next question, though.
But by the way, this is why it's good to go to used CD shops, because you can find the current one.
Support your local shops, folks.
Yeah, because you can find a lot of stuff there. I go there once in a while, and there's the dollar bin, the $3 bin, the $5, the 10, whatever it is, and you find gems there, amazing stuff. And sometimes you find that rare version that you're looking for.
I actually, the man speaks the truth. I found an original pressing of Terrapin Station in wonderful condition for $5 at a half price books, and I didn't have the heart to tell them what they had. I just wanted to buy it, so now it's on my record shelf. You mentioned Faith No More, and they're rather folks. If you haven't heard of them, please Google them. But they're a rather well-known band. You've also worked with, Walter Trout, Yngwie Malmsteen, Meatloaf, Yes, Rob Halford, to name a few. Was there a moment where you had a big like, I really hope they like the way this turns out?
Oh yeah, that happens a lot. Well, anytime you work on a project, you really want to make sure everybody's happy. And it doesn't matter if they're a big client, small client, big band, legacy band, or unknown band. At the end of the day, you get hired to do your job, and you want to make sure everybody's happy. Of course, if it's a band you grew up listening to and you're a big fan of, then of course that's that's already going to happen just from the fact that you're like, oh my God, I got the gig. So yeah, it happens. And every project requires everybody to be happy, or at least
Right
most
people
of
to be
them, to
happy.
sign off.
Yeah, the right people need to be happy, and that's what matters. But speaking about names, out of curiosity, and this may be, I hope you're okay with answering this, but I was looking through your website again at your discography, and I went over to the testimonials page, and there were a few names, um, a few names that I know that I don't know if I maybe didn't look at the page the first time you and I spoke, but I never really went down and actually read it. And obviously, the first name Matt Wallace is, everybody should know. He's a producer for Faith No More and Train and other great bands, including Blues Traveler. But to see names like Eric Gales and Billy Sherwood and someone who I am a huge personal fan of, Warren Cucurullo. Um, how does it feel to have those names on your site, giving testimony to the quality of the work that you do?
It's first of all, it's very important for me to know that these people actually like the work and they were cool enough to put that in writing. And it's always fun when you work with someone that you know their body of work, or you heard enough about them, or just, work with them and feel like, oh, okay, this is cool. That they not just like it, but they can appreciate it and respect and give you that feedback saying, man, this was good. This was, you know, um, you mentioned Warren Cucurulu, for example. For those who don't know, he wrote one of the biggest Duran Duran hits, and of course, he was in Missing Persons and played with Frank Zappa. And I actually I remember we had a phone conversation, and that quote actually came from a phone conversation because what happened is we were working together, and when we finished working together, he actually described to me what he felt about the mastering. And then I was like, "Hey, can I quote you on that?"
That's amazing.
So that kind of started the whole thing about, "Oh, okay, maybe I need to get some quotes."
I mean, but it's just again though the caliber of folks, and I mean some people you need to be in the industry to know. Some people like Warren are actually name checked in Frank Zappa songs, Catholic Girls. And it was just really wild to see, and it's a really beautiful thing that something that you said about being a fan as well, and knowing their body of work. That I think is that third ingredient to what we were talking about earlier about, knowing that you're the last stage in the production and the first stage when the consumer hears it, knowing and then and having that overhead view, being familiar with the artist's body of work. I mean, that's a huge advantage when you factor that into those other elements.
You know, it's good to know who the person is. You don't have to know everything he's done because some of these guys have done so many things that, it's an educational project just going down that, you know. Um, I did a box set for John Wetton. And before I did that box set, I only knew of his career in Asia and in King Crimson. I didn't know he had a whole solo career and a bunch of other stuff. So when I got to work on remastering those solo albums and all those unreleased tracks that were added and joined into that box set, uh, I learned so much. It was definitely an educational project for me because one, I enjoyed it, and two, it's like, oh wow, I didn't even know about this before, So, um, again, I knew his other affiliations, and bands he was part of. But that's the thing that sometimes happens is you get to work with someone, and then you're like, oh, I didn't know of him. Oh, but now I do know of him, and I've done a lot of records where you had guests on them. I did a record for William Shatner, and it had a bunch of guests on it. Uh, there's a lot of records like that are the collaboration records, and it's interesting because some of these are idols of you, some of these are people you never heard of before, and now they're big. Um, it's definitely interesting, and I have to admit, you kind of tend to forget some of the stuff you do, and not because it's forgettable, it's because there's volumes of work, and every once in a while you wouldn't remember it, but if someone throws something at it, you might be like, oh, you know what, I did a record like that. Or somebody tells me and I didn't even know it's them. I'll meet some people and they're like, oh, you did my record, and I wouldn't know that because when I get the record I don't know who's involved with it until it comes out, and sometimes I don't even know then who's involved with, because I don't have a copy, or
I
or,
th- I think
or I haven't seen it.
I think we even found out accidentally that you had mastered a tune for my friend Zalman, which is
Right.
is insane how these paths cross. And you mentioned the project being a learning curve, and I guess I would like to ask you what record masters do you look up to in your craft? Like who do you admire in your field?
That's it's a good question, but I have a terrible answer. Everyone who's been doing this for enough time. Okay? Because look, it's not an easy task. Okay? Now, there's records that I like because I like them. Okay? And the mastering engineers on it, I like because their work. But there's also other mastering engineers that I like their work, but it doesn't mean I have to like those records. But I like what they did and what they gave to the profession. Okay? It's like in sports, there's a team, right? And each person is part of that team. Okay? Um, so I look up to all the mastering engineers who basically came before me are when I'm here and still running because a lot of them brought amazing things to the table. And sometimes they had a battle to deal with because the client pushes them to areas they might not want to, but they have to supply the work. So that's why I said I have a bad answer because I can't give you one name. And once I'll give you one name, later on I'll be like, you know what? But I like all these records and I didn't mention that guy too. And I like these records as well.
I feel the same way when people ask me, who was your favorite interview? If I name one, I'm gonna. But you know what? You know who else was? Yeah, I mean, the truth is, they're all my favorite, and it's a bad answer. Like I absolutely understand, but it's the truth. They're all my favorite. I learn something new in every single interview, and it's yeah, it's this weird space where I'm grateful individually to my guests for the different things that they've brought with each of their interviews, but I'm also grateful just for everyone who's been on the show because, without all of them, we wouldn't be where we are today. So I understand the bad answer aspect of it, but sometimes just because it's a bad answer doesn't mean it's not the right one.
Yeah, or let's call it the right. This is the honest answer.
I mean, it's really also the truth because you know there's personal battles, internal battles, client battles, but there's also technological battles and barriers that masters have been pushing for decades. And it really is an area in the industry that is wholly dependent on who came before, who's currently doing it. You're constantly, I'm sure, learning new things and developing new ideas. And it is somewhat unique in that aspect.
Yeah, yeah. It's the music that comes in and what you do with it and the people's tastes. Your clients. You got to cater them, and also they trust you to take it to the next place. So you're bringing your thing, but they might want their thing, and now either you go there, you go yours, or you find something in the middle.
And then you get a song. So I mentioned before we started this interview that I had a bit of an interesting thing happen regarding something that you'd put out recently. Now, recently you put out a plugin for a piece of hardware you developed with Hendy. Is that correct?
Hendy Amps, yeah, we both of us worked on the product, the oven, and then a few years ago, a company by the name of Brainworks and Plugin Alliance released it. Yeah.
So when I got my computer back and reinstalled the software for my Volt, one of the suggested downloads was your new plugin. And I just thought I was like, oh, how about that? That's something to talk about next time we chat. And then I went and dug in a little bit further into it. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about the collaboration with Hendy Amps, how it started, and what are some of the products that you've created.
So, Chris Henderson from Hendyamps and I been working on this collaboration line called the Signature Series with Maor Appelbaum. So Chris has a Hendy Amps, that's his own company, and then the Signature Series is the collaborative products that we work together. Currently, we have 7 products. We have the oven, the stove, the grill, the cooker, the pressure cooker, the steamer, and the roaster.
Or why the kitchen names? I gotta ask.
Well, it started with the oven. It's like, oh, let's cook the music, let's make it
Ah,
sound more warm, and let's add some sizzle and this and that, and then, it started being a theme. And then you look at how the controls on it look. They look like an old ceramic oven with these knobs, and, it has a concept, and the concept is also not just visual, but it's it's sonically kind of working like that. And each unit has its own sound and also some of its own functions. So some functions are similar and some are different. The oven, stove, and grill, they're one family. And then the pressure cooker and the cooker, they're a different family. And then the roaster and the steamer, those are preamps and channel strips. So,
so let's
so
go
bes-
through each set. Or, oh, sorry, God, continue on, please.
So the oven, stove, and grill, those are stereo processors that have tone shaping, EQ, coloration, saturation. Then the cooker and the pressure cooker, they're more,
Real
they're
quick,
also tone shaping.
real quick. EQ, coloration, and saturation for our audience that don't know. Can we get just a brief description?
So EQ, like low, mid, high, bass, treble, mid range. And the coloration is there's a certain color from that unit that changes the sound, and then you can control that. And then saturation is you can go further with it and kind of drive the sound even more and get more harmonics. Um, the oven has this really nice weight in the bottom on the low end. It has a very smooth high end. The stove is very tight and clean and shiny. And then the grill is something kind of in between, has a lot of body in the mids, in the low mids, and some in the mids. It has this thickness, but it's not as shiny like the stove, and it's not as weighted on the lows like the oven. And then there's different functions in each one of them that are separated from each other. So they're only for those units, and there's functions that are similar. And then the cooker and the pressure cooker, those came more from live sound applications, but they found themselves really good for mastering and even mixing. And they have other functions. They don't have the full EQing, 3-band and air EQ. Air is like at the high end. They have more of like the high end, and then there's something in the high end that you can change. And there's different applications for that, and they're different. And then we have the steamer and the roaster. Those are preamps for recording.
and for our audience, explain what a preamp is. I actually know what it is, but just
You connect a microphone to it, and you can use that to feed your recording interface, or you can use it as a DI where you can connect your instrument like a bass guitar or a guitar or keyboard.
and what makes it different and unique than the other hardware out there? Besides for having the different capabilities, for each device, like what makes it the signature series? Give me the bad answer.
Well, every preamp, every line amp, every EQ, every compressor is different, and it sounds different. And the Signature series is a collaboration between Chris and me. So we both made sure that we like it. It's tuned to both of our ears. and the feature set and the sound is something we both like. And that's that collaboration. And we both work to make it work, as I say, and get it to the people.
I mean, and as the ones who, are the ones who are in charge of making things sound how they sound. I mean, it's the signature and the bad answer I'm gonna give is that it's yours and it's tuned to your ear. I mean, I'll say to you, it's your special sauce that you're putting into it, and Chris is no doubt absolutely credit where credit is due. But what we were talking about earlier with your master in it and putting in what you feel about it and what you hear about it to make it something that's pleasing to you at the end. I mean, that's what's in the hardware as well. And if folks are looking for that sound, I mean, by all means, go to Maor's website. Link is going to be in the description. Look at his discography. If there's an album there that you're familiar with, ask questions about it. See which product is right for you. Check it out. That link is going to be in the description as well, too. What?
Y- Yeah, Chris brings his own experience as a builder and also a musician and a mastering engineer as well. And I bring my experience as a mastering engineer and audio consultant. And so we both just merge forces, combine forces, whatever you want to call it.
Here's a bit of a loaded one. My producer had a couple of questions because he wasn't a part of Secondhand Talent. Mario was not a part of Secondhand Talent during our first interview. He joined us in season 4, and he has a couple of questions. Questions that I am not even familiar with exactly what he's asking here. But the question is, what is your hardware signal path?
Good question. I have a lot of signal paths. So my mastering room and desk features different types of converters, both, the digital to analog and analog to digital. And I have a mastering console, and that console connects different types of signal chains that I can route in, meaning I can have so many different types of sounds just by changing converters or changing different signal chains. So I don't have one, and every record is different. So I would just try different things and figure out what works with the record. So it's not one size fits it all. Is there's different sizes, different ways to approach it.
Pretty much answers the next question is if you use a hybrid signal path setting, and I guess we'll go ahead and give the bad answer, but is it hybrid? Is it digital or is it analog?
So my work, most of it is external, and then some of it is external and with plugins, and a very small amount is only plugins. Meaning, like say, 98 or 99% of my work is external hardware, and then from that 99 or 98%, there's a percentage where I'm adding plugins to what I've done with the hardware. And there's probably 1 to maybe 2% that I only do with plugins. So the actual answer is, I would say hybrid would be the best answer. And in some cases, it's just external.
Speaking of which, though, jump boarding up right off that, what? Talk us through some of the gear that you use as a master. What are some of the brands that folks may not know about that you either work with or some types of gear that you lean on? You mentioned external gear, and for someone who remembers the pre-digital age, but was mostly alive in the digital age, the idea of external gear when it comes to developing sound doesn't really click necessarily. And on YouTube we can pop up little pictures of different things we talk about. But curious about what sort of what pieces of gear do you use, on a regular basis for your work?
So a lot of the gear here is custom for me, either designed with me, for me, or modified for me. And then some of it was one-offs that were made. Um, and then I do have other stuff that's more common, like I have a mastering console from Masalek, the MTC-1X. Um, my speakers are PMCs. These ones specifically are IB1s. Um, I have an EQ by Terry EQ, the CEQ1. I have a compressor by Magic Death Eye. It's called the Magic Death Eye compressor. I have a custom box that he also built for me under Magic Death Eye, but it was a one-off. I have um I have converters like Lavery converters and JCF converters. I have also Lynx interface converters, the Hilo. I have Benchmark converters. I have different clockings. For example, I have Mutech clocking and Antelope clocking. Um, what else? I have custom pieces from Hendy Amps and me. That's what I have from Foot Control Systems, Roger Foot. We have 3 units. One is called the Workshop Ltd EMA, one is called the Bench, and one is the Torch. And then I have a Whitestone P331. That's something that people can buy. I have a Sonic Farm Master Knot. That's a new one that's going to come out soon. There's the Creamliner. There's the Rupert Neve Designs MBP, and there's the MBT. Um, what else? I have also their converter, the MBC, and then I have there's a bunch. There's a modified API 2500 compressor. There's a modified Michelangelo custom version that Handy did for me. I'm trying to say, there's an inward connections. No, what is that? No, there's an atomic squeeze box here. There's
It's just like
there's so much.
every time you turn your head, there's three or four things, and it's so fascinating to hear. I mean, just like I've been sitting here as you've been rattling off gear and names and this, that, and I'm just like, I have a microphone and a preamp and a webcam, and like I'm so curious as to how you built up your collection of equipment and how that came to be because like everything you just rattled off, like, forget about cost. Like, this is a lot of equipment to have. Like, what did you start with, and what did it take to get to where you're at now?
Oh, I have more that I didn't
I'm
mention.
sure.
The Maslek MLA4 and Maslek MEA2 and Manly Mini Massive and Thermionic Culture, Phoenix Mastering Plus, and wait, there's more. Uh, Millennia NSEQ4, SPL EQ 2050. Look, I have more. I
Yeah,
can keep on
I
if you
don't
want.
doubt it.
Look, for years I've been working very, very hard, and the money that I made, I put back in my business. So for a lot of years, I wouldn't go out and spend or go to do stuff, and I would actually save the money and invest in the gear. So you know while my someone else might be partying out and going to movies and traveling and clubs and whatever, I would keep the money and save it and reinvest it in my business. I mean, yeah, I mean, of course I could use that money and go to restaurants and you know vacations and stuff like that, but I kept it and saved it and utilized it to my business, which is what I'm running, you know.
I, running it well. I mean, it's impressive to, even in the short time between our last interview and now, the amount of times I've seen your name pop up for different projects or different award nominations or this, that, or the other, podcast appearances. It really is impressive. The way that you stay so current and the way that you do continue to produce. And out of curiosity, is it at this point more has it become more a matter of like brand recognition that brings folks to you or like word and like word of mouth, or is there still a lot that goes into like obtaining new clients, new work? Like what at this stage in the game, where do you find yourself in that spectrum?
I think I still do what I've done before. You know, um, there is a word of mouth thing. Yes, people come from that. There is recognition from credits of records I've done. Yes, there's people that you meet along the way. Different places and people make introductions. Yeah, but I still find myself working hard to get you know where I'm at, like to keep the ball rolling. You still want to get clients in. You still want to make sure you're doing a good job and having clients come in that are new. And also you want to have repeating clients. In this type of business, you could do a record with someone and they're super happy with the results and the process, and that doesn't mean they're coming back again because sometimes the producer or mixer or management or label or the band wanted to try someone else. Maybe the budget was different or they just wanted to try. So you got to keep the ball rolling, and to keep it, you got to work as it you need the work, you know?
Oh, and that gets back to, something that we were talking about earlier in our conversation about things being outside of our control. And I think that's a really important factor into something to be aware of in business is that no matter how many accolades you have or how many people are singing your praises, you know, we have a saying, "It may not neely mealy. If I am not for me, who will be for me?" We always have to be our own best advocate, and it's super important. No matter what your perceived status is by any given, you know, person, any random 10 people on the street, but to be able to put that aside and say, okay, I need to continue on this path and make sure that I'm taking care of business no matter what, not to rest on laurels or rely on any sort of that as a guarantee.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's easier because now you can get introduced to people with good accolades and uh, a work, some work that you've done and proof of it. But still, there's people who don't know those records, or or even if they do, they don't know who worked on it, and you need to remind them. Or yeah, the hustle is real, and if you're not doing it for you, then you need someone to do it for you. You know.
Absolutely. So like when I talk about secondhand talent, people who are with me all the time hear about it all the time and roll their eyes a bit, and I go, you know what? If no one is going to talk about, if I'm not going to talk about it, no one's going to talk about it. So I have to be talking about it all the time. Otherwise, nobody's going to pay any attention to it or any mind to it. It has to be something that I am proud of and that I'm wearing on my sleeve and talking about in every conversation. Otherwise, it 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 just doesn't work. One more question from my producer Mario here. Now he's a musician just like you, and I'm going to read exactly what he wrote here because I am not a musician. I'm a lot of things, but I'm not a musician. So bear with me here, folks. What are some of your favorite things in a project thinking as a musician? For example, one of Mario's favorite things about music is the bass guitar and drums and how they combine musically and sonically to produce that low end result. And then he just put a little like hyphen that says, I know it's a super specific question.
Yeah. When you listen to the music as a mastering person, you're listening to it for the first time. Hopefully, it's the first time. And you're judging it on how it hits you and what's sounding good and what's sounding less good. And if the thing that sounds less good and you're trying to improve it and it gets worse, then you have to be careful touching that. But if it gets better, then you see some kind of path to improvement. And that's part of it is doing that test and seeing how things lock together. You know, low end frequency, is it tight enough or not, or do you want it a bit more mushy? Those kind of observations and decision making, and that's really just just what it is for me. Same for Mario with the bass and the drums locking together and low end. And yeah, so for me it's more of the overall sound of everything, and how it comes out to me.
What's one of the biggest surprises you've had in the way that a master turned out where even you were like, "Oh, this kind of exceeded my expectations even for what I was shooting for."
Sometimes you discover that later on you're in a project and it seems like you're struggling, and after you finish printing it and then listening to it, sometimes you're like, wow, this is actually really good. And sometimes the opposite, you'll be like, hey, you know what, maybe I should go back. And sometimes you're like, this is what it is, I can't do better.
That's fair answer and exactly right. It's a diplomatic answer, Moore. I love it.
I don't think it's diplomatic, I think it's honest.
I mean, two things can be true at the same time. I
Yeah, no, but diplomatic is a soft way to
uh,
to
no, it's
explain it.
yeah, okay, fair
I would
enough.
call this is a a realistic answer.
I gotta say, upon reflection of both conversations now, it's so interesting, uh, how, you know, I keep poking at, has there been a project? Has there been a band? Has there been an album? And I feel like I finally gotten to the point where I understand that it's just an amalgam of all of these experiences and all of this music that's come together in your life that's brought you to where you are, that not just allows you to help facilitate this music to get it to the public's ears, but also to be able to take on clients like you mentioned. Like, I like to tell people there's two genres of music, good and bad. And obviously, a job's a job, but it's always nice to work with music that you like. And I think that, I'm really understanding it a lot more, your answer from before about how it's just this buildup of things that have come across your desk that you've turned out that's created this attitude of it really is about everything.
Yeah, a lot of it is circumstantial and situational, and you know, it's not one record that makes you either learn or unlearn. Like, you could do 20 great records that was easy for you, and then you could get one record that's so difficult. And even if you've done the other 20 and you think, oh, I know how to handle this, there's always a new surprise. There's always a project coming in and you're like, well, it's different. I changed here and it doesn't sound that right. I changed there and it doesn't, maybe I need to be more subtle here or more aggressive there. It's just, i- you're dealing with art and you're dealing with the capture of art. And the capture is not always representative of the art, because the capture is the ability to get closer to it as much as possible, and not every capture is good. Same with mixing. Not every mixing is good for it, and same with mastering, by the way. So a lot of the answers would be depends. Sometimes, they'll sound more like diplomatic, but they're more realistic than diplomatic. It's just that, we're not doing the same thing every day in terms of exact. It's not like a cookie cutter, or it's not a manufactured snack. That even there could be deviations. Everything is custom made, custom tailored to the music that's coming in, to the style of mixing that's coming in, to the quality of the recording and mixing, to the decision making of the artists and the people who are running the show as well. Sometimes the A&R comes in and makes the decisions.
Is there anyone in the mastering space that's up and coming now that you're looking at in this new generation that you're seeing is putting out some really excellent work?
Not as specific. The mastering field is now bigger than ever because there's way more mastering engineers than there were 10, 15 years ago, even 5 years ago. And the reason for that is because the entry level now is easy to get to. You get very high quality plugins. Computers are super fast. Headphones nowadays sound really good, especially if you buy the good ones. Converters now are way cheaper and deliver great results. So there might be a ton of people nowadays that can do great work, you know, in a starting position. So, you know, I'm very focused in what I do, and um, and I think that I don't know who's now upcoming that's that's bringing something fresh to the table, but I'm sure there are. It's just we don't always know because you're very dependent on the releases you're working on. You could have a crappy sounding record, but you're doing a great job, but that's what's out. And then you could be doing an amazing record as well, and maybe it didn't reach out to people. So it's hard to know who's now, you know, very, you know, very talented and young and starting out, but I'm sure there are, and every once in a while you meet someone probably, or you hear of them and they get accolades or something like that, something to push them.
And to close it out, there's a little question that's been on my mind for the last couple of days that I've been wondering. What's some of your favorite music that you listen to on a regular basis? Not talking about music that you've mastered or worked on or anything like that, but just like outside of what you're working on. What's on your playlist? What are you listening to every day?
So because I'm very dedicated to my work, most of the music I listen to is the music I work on. And then when I have free time, either I want to have no music, or I'm busy with the kids, uh, doing home stuff. And maybe once in a while, I'll pop in the studio a CD. I still listen to CDs. I actually don't listen to streaming. Um, and I'll just pop in a CD in my CD player. And I have a huge amount of CDs. And I'll just pop something. Oh, let's listen to this. But it doesn't happen every day, because when I get into a record I'm working on, I'm absorbing it like a sponge. I'm just listening to it. I'm grabbing it in, and to different degrees of how much, sometimes I will know different parts. Sometimes I'll know lyrics. Sometimes but just the sound. But point being is that when you work on music so much, you probably tend to consume it, as the music you work on is mostly what you consume. And then if I have the free time, then I'll choose silence or
Makes a lot of sense that you know I guess it's kind of similar when if you're playing music all the time, then it's some or mixing music or anything of the sort in a similar field where it's like you're constantly taking in music all day. Sometimes that silence is really just means more than notes could. More. Thank you again so much for being on the show for a second time. Are there any words you'd like to leave us with?
well, thank you again for having me. This was a fun show. Great questions. I enjoyed them, and it's always a pleasure, to come back to a familiar place and continue where. Oh yeah, my dogs are now barking.
Okay, but at least they knew when we were wrapping up, so
Yeah. Hey, thank you for taking this in
it was
consideration.
really
Um,
thank them for me too later.
I'll tell them later on.
Please,
Yeah.
yeah, send my
Um,
regards.
it's great that we can continue where we kind of stopped, or let's say we didn't even stop, but we just finished then, and now we have a continuum to that. And I'll be always happy to come back.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And honestly, one of my favorite things about having guests like you back on the show is that you're in a career that never stops moving. There's always something going on. There's always a new project. There's always a new record. There's always something to be worked on. And in the case of the gear collaboration and folks, links, all of that are going to be in the description of this episode. Um, it's really awesome to have someone on the show and then be able to get back together with them and just, talk about either what we left off or what's happened since then and have them on again and it just be a continual fluid conversation. And I really appreciate once again you taking the time for coming back on the show.
My pleasure.
Folks,
Thank
well,
you.
this has been Steiner with another episode of Secondhand Talent, and we will see you next Wednesday. That's the podcast.